This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. The shared goal across the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, as everyone is aware, is to create quality drugs. Medicinal products that meet all the requirements all of the time, including effective and safe for patients. So for years, drug makers have prioritized the implementation of robust enterprise-wide compliance management programs designed to reduce risk, enhance management controls, and ensure compliance. In our discussion today, we'll talk about the guidances available for the pharmaceutical quality system, the progression of regulatory guidance and expectations, whether or not they are helping or hindering the process, and how we can move forward with risk-based critical thinking. Here to share her thoughts with us today is Karen Ginsbury. Welcome, Karen. It's so great to have you back again.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Absolutely, absolutely. Karen, I want to see if you can kick us off today with this discussion by providing an overview of the evolution of regulatory expectations as related to the pharmaceutical quality system.
Well, I'm going to start off by telling you that I want to have a clean conscience. I've worked in and with the pharmaceutical industry for more than 30 years, and I see cheerfully, I'm not sad about it, I see retirement looming. I don't know exactly when, but I see it in the
well, congratulations on that.
So Viktor Frankl, the famous neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor, pointed out that success should not be pursued. It has to ensue. It's the unintended side effect of pursuing a cause that's greater than yourself. You have to listen to what your conscience tells you to do. And my conscience has been knocking for 6 years. Since 2015, it's been knocking, and I need to do what it demands. And that is use every power of persuasion, every medium, every podium, including this podcast, to let the pharmaceutical industry and regulators know that ICH-Q10, the pharmaceutical quality system guidance, must go. It must be dropped. It is not needed, and it is causing and has caused chaos. Initially, around 2006, when FDA came out with their quality system guidance and ICH-Q10 was just a draft, it seemed like a wonderful idea. That's because at the time, ISO 9001-2008, the International Standards Organization Quality Management System Guidance, was being developed, was being revised from the previous version, and it was talking management review, CAPA, process and performance monitoring, change management. And apart from change management, which under the name change control was already in our industry at that time, for better or for worse, usually, and even now, often for worse, those elements were completely missing from the GMPs. So you didn't find management review, CAPA, et cetera, in the GMPs. But then the GMPs were never meant to be a quality system. They were just a collection of requirements for the pharmaceutical industry. And ICH-Q10 took 4 more elements from a quality management system from that period and added them to the existing GMPs, along with the so-called enablers of knowledge management and risk management. So what did companies do? Companies had an existing quality management system of some kind. They slapped on these extra elements, hodgepodge, when they had to, when inspectors started to write them up for not doing them. So the GMPs now had CAPA attached, and risk management overtook validation as the new hot item, ICH-Q9. But, and this is the big but, and why ICH-Q10 has to go. No more pharmaceutical quality system, PQS. You asked about the PQS. Pharma doesn't need a pharma quality system. Pharma's no different to any other industry. And therefore, hashtag quality management system, QMS, ISO 9001:2015, which is the revised version from 2008, is a close to perfect quality guide, almost mirrored, by the way, in ISO 13485 for medical devices, where it's adopted, including by FDA, including by the regulators in Europe. It's process-based, and it correctly points out in the ISO guidance that kappa, remember we slapped that onto drugs in 2008, should be a redundant concept. Why? Because the primary purpose of an effective #QMS is to prevent bad things from happening. So if we really use risk-based thinking, critical process-based thinking, instead of the checkbox millions of wasted hours of risk assessments where we just have to show the inspector something, so we do. If we use risk-based thinking and we consider the context of the organization, voila, a pharma company has a pharma QMS, quality management system, and a shipping company will have a shipping QMS, and a bakery will have a baking QMS. You don't need a separate section on the quality system in Annex 1 for sterile products. If I make sterile products, what's my context? It's the fact that I make sterile products, and therefore my #QMS must address that. Do you see?
Sure. So ICHQ10, as I understand it, hasn't officially been released. It's still in draft form. Is that correct?
No, ICHQ10 was finalized in 2008.
Oh,
And
okay.
but it's a voluntary consensus guidance. You're not obligated to work according to it, and may, you can look for help if you don't work according to it, because huge elements of it were incorporated word for word into Chapter 1 of the EU GMPs. And FDA measures whether you're doing management review and kappa and process and performance monitoring and so on and so forth. So it's voluntary must. A bit like me telling my husband to take the garbage down.
So they are working on updated draft then, I think, to that, because I know there's something happening with ICHQ10 out there.
Not really. There were discussions about it, and there was an article published recently in the PDA journal where there was a task force who compared ICHQ10 to ISO 9001:2015 to see if ICHQ10 needed to be revised. And their conclusions were totally equivocal.
Okay.
Very unclear.
So it sounds like you're saying then pretty much everything in that document is redundant or is addressed elsewhere in other regulations. So
right. So
do you feel, Karen, then that we have too many guidances, or that we are currently suffering from overregulation related to the quality systems?
Yes. I think just like Brexit and the Make America Great Again policies of Trump, which were looking inwards, everyone wants their say locally, even under the guise of harmonization. Harmonization, I've talked about that in the past. They can't even agree on the spelling, whether it's an S or a Z or a Z. So we have FDA GMPs and guidances, and we have, of course, inspector's opinion as current thinking. That includes draft guidance. We have EMA, the European Medicines Agency, and separately now, because of Brexit, the MHRA in England and the HPRA in Ireland. We have PICS, which includes all of the above. We have World Health Organization publications on GMP. And if you look just in the area of data integrity, you have something like 6 guidances just from those organizations I've already mentioned. And then you have others weighing in. You've got Health Canada, you've got Japan, Australia, and Visa. They're all members of PICS. So why the redundancy? Why the redundancy? PICS is the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation or Convention. So a scheme. So why do we need all this? It's a huge waste of limited resources. The PICS guide on data integrity is 52 pages long. It's a quality management system guide. It talks about culture, it talks about resources, it talks about training. The WHO guide is 29 pages, but they have another one just on chromatography systems, which is 13 pages. GMPs in the past told companies what to do, but they allowed the #QMS to decide how to do it. Now, each regulator, each inspector wants to micromanage the quality system. And this is unwarranted interference. Companies are so busy fixing the findings from the last inspector's personal opinion that they cannot get any kind of holistic system going. Data integrity was between 2012 and 2016 the hot issue. So we slap on a load of plasters. Meanwhile, health-based exposure limits have outrun DI. Quick, put a plaster in a different place because it's bursting out there now. 2020, 2021 is all about CAPA effectiveness, training effectiveness, change effectiveness in the context of the, and I'm making air speech marks, PQS, pharmaceutical quality system. I can't say the whole name of the draft PICS guidance about evaluating change effectiveness in the context of the PQS because it makes my blood pressure go up and my doctor told me not to. That's a joke. The new, it's not a joke that it makes my blood pressure go up. I really think it does, but my doctor didn't tell me not to. The new holy cow is documenting effectiveness. So what's going to happen? The holistic QMS will wait while we will see, like we did in the era of validation, great mounds of paper, GMP, right? Great mounds of paper. We will see loads and loads of pieces of paper which will say the CAPA was effective because it didn't happen again. The change was effective because the process works. And there will be 4, 5, 10 signatures on there, and each one dated and each one printed, and we'll get this huge amount of paper. But we'll still see the endless deviations, which we tend to embrace as our best friends.
Yeah, and it's very, this is like one of those areas where it really shows how slowly we as an industry are to embrace change and new things coming down the pike. Because there are some companies who are really good about this risk-based approach that we're going to dive. I have a question about that for you in a bit, but there's other companies who are still trying to find their way and doing things I don't want to say old-fashioned way. Everybody's being careful, not to negatively impact the integrity of the product and keeping it safe for the patient. However, there's different ways that people are getting there for sure. Before we hop into, I have a couple more regulatory based questions for you, but before we hop in there, because you were talking about technology and data integrity, it made me think about where we are right now. And COVID, as most of us know, has really impacted our timeline for integrating digital technologies across the industry. It's really accelerated. And it's evident that enormous gains in productive, efficient, efficacious, and safety issues are the result, or would be the result, from these advanced technologies. How do you see that impacting PQS processes and systems, and can you speak to the potential advantages and opportunities here?
Sure, but I'm still going to correct you and saying that please don't say PQS, say QMS.
QMS,
Quality
thank
Management System. QMS, I want QMS. Anybody who talks to me has to say QMS.
QMS, you got it.
I'm not having it anymore. Not having PQS, because we're not different. We're the same.
Right.
We are process-based. We need our processes to work correctly. And as for digital technologies, including artificial intelligence and machine learning, to me, and I'm a very conservative person, but it's the only way forward, and we haven't started adopting them. When I say we haven't started, of course, that's an exaggeration, because out of the big 10 pharma companies, there are probably several who are quite a long way along their journey with those. I know of 2 companies who are a long way down the line with smart laboratories. Smart laboratories means completely paperless, no standalone equipment, everything integrated, robots, automated. They haven't quite got to drones for sample delivery, but there's no reason not to. There is honestly no reason not to. But we don't do it in our industry, just like we avoided computers, and there are still hundreds, if not thousands, of companies who, when the inspector comes in, and asks them for a list of computerized systems, answers, oh, we do everything on paper. Now,
that
seriously,
is unbelievable to me.
right. It's not just unbelievable. What is counterintuitive, exactly the opposite of what you would think, is that companies who have embraced paperless electronic laboratory notebooks, electronic batch records, have infinitely better inspection outcomes. So all the concerns about how will I get past this regulatory hurdle of validating and qualifying the electronic technologies, it proves exactly the opposite. However, we can't let the regulators completely off the hook because the bar is incredibly, and forgive me for saying, but ridiculously high for getting those systems into use. You will receive punitive action from a regulator for forgetting to check a checkbox when you have done every other part of the design and implementation of the system perfectly. So you are backing up files in two different places, which is not good. You shouldn't be doing it. It should only be on the locked drive.
For sure, right.
But it is clearly apparent that this is an error, a trivial error that has no consequences whatsoever. So why do they write it on the 483 or on the inspection report? Why?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Do you feel like, I mean, obviously we know there are organizations in this industry who are very advanced, as you mentioned. They have smart laboratories, or they have fully integrated technology into their systems, and there's those that haven't, clearly, as you mentioned. Do you, as an industry, do you feel we possess the agile, responsible, and proactive governance structure that's necessary in allowing us to keep pace as the size and scale of these data-based interventions expand, particularly into new areas like artificial intelligence and machine learning, which you alluded to?
I think that as an industry, we have stagnated. We have almost come to a stop. That is primarily an outcome of intensive focus by regulators on micromanagement in inspections.
Yeah.
Where regulations used to talk, CGMP regulations, about what to do, they now talk about how to do it. Every inspector, think about Europe, think about 28 states. Okay, Britain and Ireland have gone out, so 26 states, whatever it is. And each one of them has two inspectors who are part of the EMA Inspectors Working Group. And every one of those, that's 56 people. And each one of them, oh, and then there are 4 representatives from EMA, so it's 60 people. And each one of them has a say, obviously. Right. Each one of them has a personal opinion. When they write a guidance or when they update the GMPs, they are putting in levels of details, and inspectors are coming in and making observations, which frankly, after 30 years of working with quality management systems, they have no business to be making. And I will give you a couple of examples. One example that I'll give you is that the inspector comes in, can you show us your SOP for pharmacopoeia updates? Now, companies are obligated to stay up to date with the updates in pharmacopoeias, which, by the way, is at an alarming rate. Pharmacopoeias, when I started out in industry, were updated once every 5 years. They are now, as a business strategy, updated every year, which has introduced increased errors and an increased massive burden on industry, as well as costs of purchasing.
Sure.
But okay, you have to stay up to date. You don't have a choice. You absolutely must.
Right.
So here's a company who is up to date, but they don't have a written standard operating procedure which describes how they stay up to date. They're a small company. The head of the laboratory scans Pharmacopoeial Forum and Pharma Europa every time they come out, every 2 months or whatever it is, and updates things. The regulator found nothing. They did not find methods that were not updated. The company, during the inspection, wrote a procedure. And yet, on the inspectional observations, it said the company had no SOP for performing pharmacopoeial updates. And then it said they wrote one during the course of the inspection. Now, I ask you, Stacey, that company now has to respond to that observation, right? So you take the resources sit down, and what do they write? They write, despite the fact, as we showed the inspectors during the inspection, right? As we showed them, so this has all been taken care of anyway.
Right.
As we showed them during the course of the inspection, all our pharmacopoeial updates had been performed and we were completely up to date. As the inspectors wrote in the report, we wrote an SOP during the course of the inspection and we presented it to the inspectors. We attach it here for your convenience once again.
Right. So more redundant behaviors.
How many resources should be spent on a matter which has no impact whatsoever, no potential impact on the patient?
That's a great question. And obviously, they did have to take time to respond and provide that information, which obviously had been previously provided. And to your point, Karen, there have been we've seen a tremendous rise in the number of significant violations of GMP regulations for finished pharmaceuticals. Is that due to a lack of process, as you mentioned here, SOPs that were missing within the organization, or more an inability to apply the concepts included in the guidances?
Or to answer personal opinion.
Sure.
Are you sure that there's an increase in the number of significant violations of CGMP regulations? Or is there an increase in the number of inspections, redundant inspections, longer inspections, together with an increase in the amount of minute, detailed, opinion-oriented observations? I heard today, Stacey, just as these things, as the Lord makes them happen for our convenience, of a company who FDA was in there inspecting them, and they sat for half a day discussing whether it was acceptable or not acceptable, them having scanned the original documents as true copies to then destroy the original copies, which has been something that has been going through my head for years and years and years. Now, if you read the regulations, the GMP regulations, very, very carefully, you will see that it is crystal clear that true copies are allowed if they have been authenticated against the master, in which case, what possible benefit could there be in my retaining the original? Why bother to scan it then?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so the regulations, in my opinion, are crystal clear. But this company got an observation from FDA. It is not okay to shred the original documents, even if you have the scanned true copies.
Which seems...
And they sat for half a day on that, Stacey.
Yeah, I mean, it seems counterintuitive at the outset and also a waste of time. And it sounds like there's
resources. Time is a resource.
Absolutely.
It's salaries being paid to inspectors from FDA, and it's salaries being paid to the people in the company who are not being productive. They are sitting there discussing trivial minutiae, which in no way impact the quality management system. They are not capable. Companies cannot get an effective quality management system running because they are so busy writing responses to trivial observations, which could go in the full report if the inspector really believes that there is an issue here. So write it down. Write it down. It will be there. Next time you come back, did they take care of it? Or if they took care of it, don't put it on the report. They don't have to respond to it because they've already responded.
Sure. So, and it sounds like, there are a lot of personal biases, very subjective opinions being used during the regulatory inspections, at least for some of these businesses that you are referencing here. And clearly that must be impacting the, and as you mentioned, it has to be contributing to this increase in warning letters. How do we get past that? Like, how do we get the inspectors to really be more objective in their reporting and leave some of these biases behind? It's such a difficult thing.
Right. I think that everybody, regulator and industry alike, is thinking about benefit to the patient.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
So we have to ask ourselves, what is the benefit to the patient of these biases? The harm, the actual harm, there's benefit and there's harm, right? The actual harm to the QMS is massive, because that time is lost forever. Those resources that are wasted in these detail-oriented inspections, those are quality resources that are not involved in risk-based thinking, in planning, in checking, and in understanding the current context of the organization. It is just piecemeal. It is about putting out the fire from the last regulatory observation. And sadly, I think very much in line with the current worldwide political situation, which in democracies seems to have reached an all-time low. I mean, really, we've seen, terrible things. I speak from Israel. We're on our 4th election in less than 2 years, and it's very, very likely we'll go to a 5th one.
Right.
Right? And Brexit and Trump. And so personal bias and subjective opinions, disregard for science, also a disregard for people, an unwillingness to understand context, which is why GMP is used only to say what to do and not how to do it, because the context of the organization totally impacts how they choose to run their system. So these are impacting findings, and therefore they're harming the robustness of the quality management system.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not saying that the regulator's job is easy. They have a very short time per company, and in that time, they have to find out what is going on there. And of course, if they miss it, they're going to get into terrible trouble because they're responsible for public safety.
Right.
But and they have to understand the good, the bad, the ugly. And there are real rogues out there. We should never forget that. There are, and not a few, unfortunately.
Right.
Nevertheless, since data integrity reared its ugly head, we have gone back to you're all cheats, thieves, and liars. They send in inspectors who are like criminal detectives. They ask the same question 3 different times on 3 different days to 3 different people and match up the answers. And a one-size-fits-all approach where everyone's a criminal, thief, and cheat, and only I, in other words, the lead inspector, know how to save the world without an inkling of the overall day-to-day functioning of the company and how their system works, it's so harmful as well as demotivating. I have seen a really successful head of quality walk away from our industry after such an inspection. She lost it completely. She for a year was dysfunctional. It took a year until her company realized that she was dysfunctional because they were so used to her being so good. But the inspectors were so obnoxious that she felt humiliated and she completely lost her motivation. And in the end, she got up and walked away. I've seen a talented colleague retire because she was the queen of data integrity, got so sick of the petty details, which block any possibility of digitization and automation unless you're one of the big 10 and have endless funds and armies of people to check every little line in the validation.
Yeah. And I mean, and I just want to say, there are good inspectors and there are not so good inspectors, just like every industry and every profession. You're going to find those people who are doing a great job, doing the best they can, and those who aren't. And that is, unfortunately, some of what is going on here. But I want to follow up and ask you, as an industry, if our QMS efforts are to use risk-based critical thinking to increase product quality and continuously improve on our processes and knowledge, what shift needs to be made?
So you forgive me for the correction, but it isn't really about increasing product quality. A product, if you, to quote Philip
Ensuring
Crosby,
product quality, then how's that, right?
Well, Philip Crosby in Quality is Free says that either there is quality or there is non-quality. Either a product meets all the requirements or it does not. So risk-based critical thinking should, if we can, go back. If we can go back to a reasonable level of regulatory oversight, less guidance and less how to do it and more what to do, that should free up resources for process understanding in the truest sense of the word, and effective controls being put in place, effective controls being digital, being automated, being peopleless, paperless, like the e-commerce companies, using big data rather than what we do. We collect big data and then we bury it. We consistently avoid in any way analyzing it or applying it as useful knowledge. We say, no, we'll manage by exception. But the e-commerce companies don't do that. If I go onto Google and I book myself a plane ticket in the good old days to England, then 20 seconds later, I get ads popping up for car rentals in London, for theatres in London, what are the newest shows? And so where's all this in our industry? We do our product quality reviews, our annual product reviews, by taking tweezers and picking out the numbers one by one from the batch records manually.
Yeah, it's funny, as you're talking, you know, I'm thinking the idea of numerous regulatory outlets and overlapping guidance here. It's making me think of the One Voice of Quality initiative, which for post-approval changes. And you know, their idea there is to really streamline that process and have one point of entry, or basically one opinion, if you will, from the regulators. How do you see your ideas in relation to that movement, Karen? Because it kind of sounds like we're headed in that direction where we need to have a single entity or a single mode or method of inspection and managing quality systems and the whole lot of it.
So let me say that I think that the One Voice of Quality is a fabulous initiative. And I really hope and pray that my drop ICHQ 10 in favor of ISO 9001 2015 will resonate, and that they'll be one of the many groups who have a voice to apply pressure for it to happen. PDA did an amazing job in coordinating comments for Annex 1 between 10 different industry groups. If this includes One Voice of Quality, so much the better. PDA has already shown interest in my conscience in the drop ICHQ 10 and take on ISO. But I would just also add to that PICS is the pharmaceutical inspection. It was originally the convention and now cooperation scheme, and it has more than 53 participating regulatory authorities. So if that is the case, and that includes FDA, and that includes every European state, it includes England and Ireland, it includes Japan, to the best of my knowledge, Australia, Canada. So and they are working in their work groups on harmonization of inspections. They have set up an academy for inspectors. However, I fear that PICS is to a large extent behind the micromanagement, because they're getting a lot of input, primarily from Europe, which is very, very detail oriented. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong, Stacey. I am not advocating ineffective inspections. I am not advocating inspections that don't do their job. Inspectors do need to come in. They have a very tough job to do, and they need to do it. But they do not and should not manage in any way the quality system. And just one more example of what I call shooting yourself in the foot is management review. Because if I know that as an inspector, you're going to come in and ask to see my presentation, my PowerPoint or whatever it is that I used for that, and my findings, and you are going to use that in a punitive manner against me, then it becomes the same as internal audits. If you're going to ask to see, which they do not ask to see. So if you're going to ask to see my internal audits, I'm not going to write down the bad things.
Sure. Because
I'm going to get told off and I'm going to get punished for doing it. An effective quality management system runs itself. Now, of course, there are the rogues, so they need to be weeded out.
Right.
But I think there's a certain element of laziness here. It's much more, or maybe even more fun. It's more fun to go into a company and tell them what to do, right? I know what to do, so I'm telling you what to do, and you better do it because I have the power not to renew your GMP certificate.
Yeah, that just seems so counterintuitive to me. To really, I mean, the inspectors, in my estimation, should be there to help ensure that the patient is getting the highest quality, best product they can, and that things are happening within the pharmaceutical company that allow that to happen, but not the hows, right? Just the, I mean, we have the guidances lay out the expectations, but they shouldn't tell us how we meet those goals, right? We should, as a company, be able to figure out how that works best within our own organization. But yet that doesn't sound like what's happening.
It's not just, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I agree with that. We have lost any element of flexibility, and we have lost any element of having the possibility of an effective system, because we are so busy micromanaging this detail and this detail and this detail from the previous inspection and the previous inspector. And don't forget, companies are global, so they have inspectors coming in from different inspectorates with different opinions, which is fine. Different opinions is okay, but not at the micromanagement level. You know, when I was in school, I studied Russian, and I learned a story. I learned it in Russian. I still remember a few words of it in Russian, but I'll say it in English. About a grandfather and a grandson who are taking their donkey to the marketplace to sell it. And so the grandfather says to the little boy's 5, and he's got little short legs, and he says to him, you go on the donkey and I'll walk alongside. They walk a few steps and someone stops them and they say, you know, this is a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. There's the little boy. He's young and full of energy and everything. He's riding on the donkey. And the poor old man who can hardly stumble along and everything, he's walking. So of course the kid gets off immediately, and the grandfather gets on, and they go a few more steps and someone else stops them. And he says to them, this is dreadful, absolutely dreadful. Can't you see the little kid? He's got these little short legs. He can't do it. They look at each other, and the boy gets up behind the grandfather. So they go on a few more steps, and someone stops them and says, I cannot believe what you're doing. That poor donkey, that donkey cannot bear the weight of both of you. So they end up carrying the donkey to market. And that is where we are.
Yeah.
We are carrying the donkey to market.
Yeah. Yeah. Too many cooks spoil the broth sometimes, right?
Yep.
Karen, I want to ask you to revisit something that you said earlier in the conversation where you mentioned CAPA and its place in risk-based QMS processes, which, if I recall correctly, what you said, it has no place in QMS processes. But I want to see if you can expand on your thoughts here on that.
Sure. CAPA is dead, but it won't lie down. It was always wrong, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
And therefore, if at all, it should have been PACA. In other words, first prevent, and then if you failed with your prevention, which of course is going to happen even in the best QMS system in the world, sure, then you do corrective actions. However, like I said, we are always lagging in our industry. So I refer you to ISO 9001:2015, which states one of the key purposes of quality management system is to act as a preventive tool. That's the purpose of a QMS. Therefore, consequently, it says, this international standard does not have a clause on preventive actions. Bingo. Since 2015, no clause on preventive actions, whereas in our industry, we only introduced CAPA in 2008. And now, 2021, 2020, we're plastering on effectiveness checks. My conscience wants CAPA out along with ICHQ 10. And you're probably going to ask me why, and ISO has the answer to that as well. And the answer is the risk-based thinking, which is the premise, process, management, manage your processes, use risk-based thinking, put controls in place. This risk-based thinking has enabled some reduction in prescriptive requirements. Oh, there you go, micromanagement, inspector's personal opinion. This risk-based thinking has enabled some reduction in prescriptive requirements and their replacement by performance-based requirements. In other words, if my pharmacopoeial monographs are up to date, who cares if I have an SOP or not? Right? Let's be honest. If it's working, then it's okay. And let me choose where I place my resources. If they're not up to date and I don't have a system and the system isn't documented, I have a problem.
Correct.
Right? So that is why ISO 9001:2015 is a fabulous guidance. It really is. It's a real quality management system. And what do they carry on and say? There is greater flexibility than in ISO 9001:2008, which is the parallel and the basis for ICH Q10, which is why Q10 has to be buried. There is greater flexibility in the requirements for processes, for documented information, and for organizational responsibilities. In other words, give me a break. Do not sit for half a day discussing whether a true copy scan means I can or can't destroy the original document. Because my true copy scan is to every single effect equivalent to the original document. I can deposit a check today by taking a photo of it on my phone, and then I tear up the check. That's money.
Right.
So why can we do it for money and we can't do it for pharmaceutical documentation?
Yeah, I think it's just because we have failed to really embrace the technology and the knowledge that's out there, right? And we just keep reinventing the wheel in some instances.
But we pay lip service. We pay lip service because the regulators at every forum stand up and say, we want industry to use big data. And then if you do, you didn't check this little checkbox and you're backing up to the wrong place.
Right. So Karen, given that current environment then, like where we are and all we're discussing and looking at what's going on as we struggle still to move on from this pandemic and you know, continue to take baby steps toward embracing digitization and digital technologies, what are the most immediate steps that need to be taken to strengthen the QMS process?
Oh, you're really taking it on, haven't you, Stacey? You're my mate. You're already a QMS person. Well, I think that COVID exploded a lot of myths about pharmaceutical development. Right. Do you think the vaccine manufacturers implemented quality by design and design of experiments and multifactorial experiments? They certainly did not. They bashed out the product. I was part of the clinical trial. You were part of the clinical trial, and we're grateful for that, right? Right. I'm double vaccinated. I don't need to wear masks anymore outside. I live in Israel, who did the whole thing so incredibly well, and I'm grateful that they did, and I'm grateful to the regulators. I don't want you to think, I don't want anyone to think that I am anti-regulators. We need regulators. We work in an industry which can kill people, and unfortunately has done, and not just once. So, and there are rogues, and we need to regulate those rogues. But somehow or another, we need to put the jack back in the box. Right. It's complicated to do that, but we really do need to. So the regulators, under horrendous political pressure, managed to do record-breaking review times, and a lot of voodoo, about 15 to 30 years for development or however long for vaccine, maybe slightly less, have been broken. To say nothing of first in human trials, because the vaccines were all first in human. Absolutely. So the steps to strengthen the QMS, all of the above: disrupt, drop ICH Q10 and drop Kappa, adopt ISO 9001 2015 as an excellent non-prescriptive model of a flexible quality management system. To my mind, this is so overdue. It just can't happen soon enough. The next step, lower the regulatory bar, the hoops and hurdles to Pharma 4.0 entry, to digitization and to automation. Would we not be better off with a holistic, digitized, smart factory than with manual data handling and data integrity issues? And why not? Even at the risk of forgetting to check a box and saving files in two places. The first is a disaster and the other is a tiny, almost insignificant loophole.
Sure, right. And so it sounds like, I mean, that is definitely the ideal scenario. What's the likelihood that regulatory agencies are willing to move in that direction?
Well, industry has to make the overture. I'm certain that some regulators will understand instantly. FDA, Janet Woodcock, a couple of years back stated publicly that they failed in the quality management system area. Rick Friedman, to the best of my knowledge, is a Philip Crosby fan. So if we can start the dialogue and make the case convincingly, I would say that they'll listen.
Time will tell, Karen. I think, and I'm sure, I really appreciate your time today to talk about this topic. It is, I know, something you've been thinking about for years now. Certainly, probably a bit controversial, and I'm sure I'll hear from some folks on it. But it definitely is cause for us as an industry to pause and look at the way we are doing this now, because it clearly isn't working.
No, it isn't.
As it was intended. And it certainly is harmful to many of these organizations. So with that being said, and as we get ready to wrap up today, I just want to see what last thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Sure. I would say disrupt. Elon Musk, Tesla, overtook Jeff Bezos as the world's richest man in January of this year. And he's currently disrupting 8 industries, and he's made NASA irrelevant with his SpaceX.
Right.
Everyone said he was crazy. And in 2019, they said Tesla was going bankrupt. I said it wouldn't. I said that was rubbish. Yeah. Sorry, garbage for the Americans. If you believe any of this podcast, please stop using the term PQS, pharmaceutical quality system, just like Stacey did, and only use #QMS. Stop using the term kappa and use risk-based thinking, and acknowledge that anything reactive means the #QMS failed, or not failed, stumbled. We don't like the word failed. We say stumbled, and we can pick it up. And corrective action is needed. Don't let me mislead you. I don't want you to think that this will lead to no deviations. But in a mature quality management system, a company understands why they don't have problems with quality. Whereas a PQS, a pharmaceutical quality system, if there is such a thing, asks over and over in a confused blur, why have we got so many quality problems? So thank you very much, Stacey, for the platform. And you've helped me very much, I think, on my mission to retiring with a clean conscience.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen Ginsbury. It's such a pleasure to have you as our guest today. Really appreciate your time and perspectives on this, Karen. And I can't wait for our audience to hear it and provide some feedback as well. I also want to give a big shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen. Thanks,
Yay!
Ben. Yay!
Thank you, Ben.
Most importantly, thank you to you, our valued listeners. We are grateful for your time each week and hope that you continue to share this podcast. And don't forget to send us your ideas and guest suggestions. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player of choice and be sure to share with your friends, colleagues, and online networks so they can enjoy it too. Plus, send us a quick note or leave us an online review. We'd love to include your feedback with our networks. For show notes and additional podcast resources, please be sure to visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another informative and thought-provoking discussion. Until then, make it a great week.